Welcome back for another helping of oysters, clams, and cockles presented by Bolin Media. I am Ross Bolin here with Barrett Dudley, and today we are here to discuss the HBO documentary Wise Guy, David Chase, and The Sopranos, which essentially serves as like a behind-the-scenes making of the Sopranos documentary. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the Emmys, which just occurred over this past weekend. Barrett, are you cool with that?
I'm cool with it, man. I'm hip.
You're coolin'?
I'm hip.
All right. 2024 Emmys were hosted by Dan and Eugene Levy. What was the first movie you ever saw Eugene Levy in? Or the first time you ever saw Eugene Levy?
I mean, got to be American Pie.
Right? For you and I, for our generation, that was our introduction.
That was our introduction to Eugene
Levy. But he's been in a ton of stuff.
I know he's been in other stuff before that as well, stuff that we probably have also seen.
Right.
But that's like the iconic character, like the introduction of Eugene Levy to our generation certainly is as Jim's dad in American Pie.
Catches his son making coitus with a pie.
With an apple pie.
Yeah. It happens. Yeah. It's part of
fatherhood.
And
doing some other stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Jerking off stale fish in the bedroom. about to hook up with a European exchange student. All sorts of hijinks.
Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah.
Eugene Levy also notably in Almost Heroes, the final movie Chris Farley starred in with, what's his name?
Matthew Perry.
Matthew Perry, thank
also
you.
Late.
I kept wanting to say Chandler. No. Matthew Perry also who passed away, but yeah, ridiculous character in Almost Heroes. And his son, Dan Levy, obviously huge breakthrough with Schitt's Creek, where he kind of became a household name as a result of that. I don't know that I've ever seen him in anything else, but he's fantastic in Schitt's Creek.
He's doing the commercials right now with Heidi Gardner from SNL. He's in those. And
sorry.
He's in a couple of episodes of the final season of Sex Education.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. He's an American teacher. One of the students goes over to the old US of A for a little exchange program, speaking of exchange students. And he's the English teacher.
He wrote on Schitt's Creek as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right.
I don't think I am. Anyway, we're not really here to discuss how the Emmys went in terms of the hosting.
You don't want to just keep discussing Dan Levy and
Eugene Levy's career? No, we could. I just wanted to give him a little hat tip up top. More to the point, the results of the Emmys, the biggest of which was that Shogun set a single season record for a single season of television, bringing home 18 Emmys. That includes Creative Arts Emmys, which they do like the week or two prior to the actual Emmys themselves.
So it set a record for most Emmys ever?
No single season of television has ever won more Emmys than Shogun Season 1 just did.
Wow.
18, which is wild. And we brought this up, I think, last week on Patreon, how funny it was that when we were deciding what to cover next, there were two shows on the table. Shogun and something I can't even remember the name of.
It was on
HBO.
It was the Kate Winslet one on HBO. The Regime?
The Regime. And we ended up going with Shogun because we just had like a good feeling about it. And thank God we did, because it ended up being incredibly fun to cover and discuss episodically on our podcast. If the Emmys and the results of the Emmys are the thing that finally drive you to watch Shogun, remember, we have a podcast, a companion podcast for every single episode of that show. All you have to do is scroll down in our feed and you'll find them. But Shogun won Best Drama Series. Hiroyuki Sanada won Best Actor in a Drama. And then Anna Sawai won won Best Actress in a Drama.
She did.
So Sanada was the first Japanese actor ever to win an Emmy. And then moments later, she became the second Japanese actor to ever win an Emmy, which is pretty cool.
Yes, very cool.
Anyway, they crushed.
They did.
Really, really, a surprising result to me. That was a fantastic season of TV, as you and I said repeatedly during our coverage. I did not think they would have as much success as they did at the Emmys necessarily. And now I can see why they got a season 2 and 3 signed on for.
Yeah, and I mean, they kind of played this just right, because the truth is, well, let me rewind just a little bit.
Do it.
Did you know that the Emmys were coming on this past Sunday? Or were you like scrolling around like or your TV guide or your social media and you're like, oh, Emmys are tonight?
I knew we were in Emmys season because
Okay.
I was seeing reporting on the Creative Arts Emmys.
Did it feel to you like were you just did it feel either kind of like not as important this go round? Did it feel kind of off to you? Was something weird? Did you have any sense in that range?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I did not watch it.
Yeah. Okay. So I barely tuned in. I watched Dan and Eugene Levy's. Do you want to go back to their careers?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I watched their opening monologue, and then I saw a couple of the awards given out. But the Texans were in a big matchup that night,
It's football season.
and we had them in our survivor pool. So I was pretty glued to that. Yeah, I had this sense. It was like, why don't I care about this as much this year? And then I remembered this was the second Emmys this year.
Oh.
Because of the strike,
Oh, yeah.
last year's Emmys got pushed to January of this year. So this was our second Emmys in the calendar year,
So
within
our
9
Emmys-
months of each
Our
other.
Emmys tank is still kind of full.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it wasn't ready to be gassed up
Right,
again.
okay.
So now we're back on the regular schedule, and we won't get another one until next September.
Okay.
But there was this, and I think some of this was reflected in the voting and in some of the stuff that we saw. Okay, back to Shogun. The drama series category kind of had there was a power vacuum, right? Like no Succession this year, no House of the Dragon this year, right? So like there was I'm pulling up the
Who they were even up against?
list right now,
It's like
but
The Crown, Fallout, The Gilded Age,
the morning
The
show,
Morning Show, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Slow Horses, Three Body Problem.
not exactly like, not that any of those shows are bad. Y'all know my own personal feelings about Fallout, but
Hater.
there's not like a heavy hitter in that lineup, really.
Not one that could compete with Shogun.
The Crown was in its sixth and final season, which kind of just came and went, right? Fallout is a video game series that, you know, if you're including me, had mixed reviews. The Gilded Age doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot on HBO.
It is great, though.
Even though people say it's very enjoyable.
It is great.
The morning show, everybody considers a C+ show, except for the Emmys, who keep nominating and giving it awards for some
I
reason.
could not care less about The Morning Show.
Slow Horses is awesome, but like, is it
No.
is it a staggering achievement the way that something like Shogun is? Not really. And then
Absolutely not.
Three Body Problem, again, was a very expensive and a very cool show that had mixed results in its first season.
Also mixed reviews,
right?
yeah.
So I think that I think Shogun was an amazing show. We kind of briefly mentioned either on Patreon or one of our podcasts the other week that like that's the number one show for you and I thus far this year.
Right.
And I mean, like, it kind of just stepped in and was like an automatic kind of choice here.
Yeah, when you look at those options, it's far less shocking that
Yeah.
they won Best Drama. I love Slow Horses. I'm caught up on what is it, season 3 or 4 that we're on here that's actively coming
Season
out
4.
weekly on
Yeah.
Apple TV Plus. But even the most recent episode I watched after it ended, I told my wife Lexi, I was just like, I like this show,
Yeah.
but it's good. It's
Yeah.
not great. It's what's his name? Who's the star?
Gary Oldman.
This is the Gary Oldman show. Like, he is what makes this show. And some of the other characters are good, too. I'm not saying they're not. And the writing is solid. But it's pretty simple in terms of, like,
100%.
the plot operates the same way every season. There's sort of like a weird spy mystery, and it's a 6-episode season. The episodes go by quickly, and that's that.
I mean, it's a hang. Like, I just like
Yeah.
hanging with that show. Like, Gary Oldman is funny. The mystery, the spy stuff is pretty cool. But I'm not like, my jaw's not on the floor.
Yeah.
I'm not like, oh my God. Like, there's no performance like Anna Sawai's.
No, that's
in there.
blowing your
Or
mind.
the Yabushige or the Toranaga performances from
Right.
those guys. Like, that was next level shit.
So I'm not trying to dump on Slow Horses. I'm just saying, I think it's a rung below, like, the best of the best on TV that you mentioned some of, like, that we think of historically, like Succession when it was still on. And Shogun fits into that category, where it was very
Yes.
original,
Yep.
very powerful, did some new things that we haven't really seen done before, on top of having all these incredible performances, the historical accuracy, all of the cultural consideration that they did in the creation of that thing. So yeah, you look at the competition and it's like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. A lot of people were saying that it couldn't be done, and Shogun said, no, we can definitely show cannon practice on TV. And that was...
Nobody had done that before, though. Cannon practice on television. Really, you never see that. So yeah, congratulations to Shogun. Pretty incredible results for them. Barrett, one of your other favorite shows on TV that you actually put me onto, Hacks. Big win. Big upset win. Best comedy series.
Yeah, and again, so I think this was two-pronged. I think that people the Bear comes out at a very strange time, typically, right? Because its seasons come out basically at the very beginning of the new Emmy window. So here, everybody just got done watching a polarizing season 3 that I think we can agree the consensus is not as good as season 2.
Oh, definitely not as good as season 2.
It kind of feels like that had an effect on the voting a little bit.
So was this voting for season 2?
Yes.
See,
arguably the best season of The Bear through 3 seasons.
That's pretty wild to me.
Yeah. But when they were voting on the Emmys for the January one, they had already seen season 2. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's like a weird thing that even even if the voters are able to decipher which season they are actually voting on, it's like they can't help but be influenced by the season that they also just got done watching. And so I don't want to get her name wrong. Liza Kolonis.
What is she? Who is she?
She won for Best Supporting in a comedy, Best Supporting Actress. She plays Tina on.
Oh yeah, it's Liza Zayas.
Liza Zayas. So she won Best Supporting Actress in a Comedy.
Yeah.
But her big episode was the one that everybody just watched in season 3.
Are you positive that this was season 2 they're voting on?
Positive, yes.
Oh man, that is so confusing.
Yes.
Wow.
So, but you see how
she should win next year.
Right. Exactly.
That's the one she should win for.
That's the one she should win for. So I feel like people were like, there was sort of like a season 2 bias while they were voting for season 1, and also they just gave it all those awards only 9 months ago. And then there's the conversation about whether The Bear is actually a comedy or not. Shouldn't this just be lumped in with the dramas because it's not really very funny anymore?
Right.
And so I just feel like there was like this cocktail of elements, that kind of like opened the door for Hacks to sneak through and get the dub.
Yeah, season 2 of The Bear is one of the most stressful seasons of television I've ever watched, and I love me some stressful TV. I've seen a lot of it. Season 3, much less stressful, totally different stylistically.
Right.
And, well, not stylistically, but like in terms of the way the season plays out. Yeah, so that is really strange, man. Because even as I'm going through the results and reading that Liza Zayas won Best Supporting Actor over like Meryl Streep, becoming the first Latina to win the category, by the way. I was assuming in my head that was because of the I was like, oh yeah, well of course she crushed that episode in season 3, but like that wasn't even in the consideration. So
nope.
Weird, man. Yeah. Really, really weird.
Chris Dorr did win for directing for the Fishes episode, which is the stressful Nightmare Thanksgiving House episode.
Right. Yeah, an all-timer.
So there are clues, there is evidence that you're voting on season 2 here, but it was still like a weird thing, and then Hacks slipped through and won.
Yeah, big for Hacks, which Barrett has been a large
big supporter of
vocal
Hacks.
supporter of and got me to watch. I'm not caught up, but I really enjoyed the first 2 seasons that I watched. Jean Smart won her 3rd Best Actress in a Comedy Award for the 3rd season of Max's Hacks. So that's not an HBO show. Is that a Max?
That's one of the many that was basically developed and then bought when HBO and Max were separate content divisions, and they were each buying and like producing shows through individual like siloed channels, and in some cases were even like apparently like bidding, like quote unquote bidding against each other for these things.
Shit show.
So yes, that one was scooped up by Max and was a Max original. But now I don't know. Now I don't know what they're gonna do, because like it seems like they can just kind of like retroactively be like, nah, that's an HBO show.
That's what they did with The Penguin.
So I would not.
It was a Max original, and then before it's come out, they're like, never mind, it's an HBO original.
I mean, now now it just won Best Comedy, and I imagine that season 4 will just be an HBO show.
Weird stuff.
Yeah.
Jeremy Allen White also won Best Actor in a Comedy for the second straight year for his performance on The Bear Season 2. Ebon Moss-Bachrach repeated as Best Supporting Actor for his performance as Cousin Richie on The Bear Season 2. Like Barrett said, Liza Colin-Zayas won. So The Bear still picked up a lot of awards.
It did. Yep.
That's why it was a surprise when Hacks picked up Best Comedy Series. But frankly, Hacks was probably due for a bit of a hat tip here because, like Barrett has said repeatedly, it is quite good. Very well written, cool inside look into like the entertainment industry and comedy in particular and Hollywood on the whole, and great setting, great cast, great writing. Netflix's Baby Reindeer won Best Limited Series.
Kind of cleaned up in limited series a little bit.
Which I was very high on when it came out. Like I said, it's super, super dark at different points, and it's really weird and quirky, but it's definitely worth a watch if you can stomach some of the more difficult episodes, of which there's at least one that sticks out in my head as pretty traumatizing.
Do people get murdered in this show?
No murder.
Okay.
Just horrific abuse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Creator and star Richard Gadd won for his lead acting and for his writing. And Jessica Gunning, who plays his stalker, won Best Supporting Actress. And one of the most surprising awards of the night to me was Jodie Foster.
Yes.
Winning for True Detective Night Country, Best Actress in a Limited Series.
She did.
Night Country was obviously another very polarizing show, right? There were a lot of haters. And when it was all said and done, I sat somewhere in the middle. Like, I enjoyed it. It wasn't great, but it was okay. It was good. It was fine. It was what it was. It was very, very different than the first 3 seasons of True Detective, obviously. They've gone in a different direction creatively, had a new showrunner. What's his name? Nick Pizzolatto was out. But all of that said, really nothing about Jodie Foster's performance struck me as like worthy of acclaim. It didn't seem that
we
great.
We talked quite a bit about it in our coverage, and it was a performance that, let me say this, it had kind of been given the Emmy before the show even came out,
right?
In a way,
based on the reviews we saw and stuff.
People were talking about what a lights out, knockout, star turn, Camp Jodie fucking Foster. She's
she's back.
She's back. Silence of the Lambs, Contact. Now she's on True Detective. Yeah. And so it was like I don't think people were going to critique it. You know what I mean? Like no matter what they saw on screen. Only white men like you and I were brave enough to do so. And look, I don't think that Jodie Foster's performance in Night Country was bad. It
wasn't bad.
It kind of like got overhyped a little bit, I think. And I don't know. I've seen better from Jodie Foster, and then I think the overall kind of the overall what's the word I'm looking for? Quality of the show kind of also took away from it a little bit because you maybe had fewer issues with it than I did.
She was like my 4th favorite character on the show, though. And she was up against Juno Temple in Fargo.
Yes.
Which I think should have probably won.
I agree.
And then also Brie Larson in Lessons in Chemistry, which is quite good and well thought of. So kind of surprising to me.
Yes. Yeah. I think, and so again, I think this was probably between Juno Temple in Fargo, Brie Larson, Lessons in Chemistry, and Jodie Foster in True Detective Night Country. My guess is that Night Country was by far the most watched of those 3. It did pretty well in the ratings for HBO. And Jodie Foster is, a Hollywood icon, basically.
Hollywood darling, yeah.
Yeah, and she's, so I just think it was probably an uphill climb for Brie and Juno there. Although Juno would have been that's where my vote would have gone for sure.
Big same. I also have to theorize that the negative backlash around True Detective Night Country puts the Emmys in a nice little position to be like, fuck you guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Moving on. Any other Emmys thoughts from you before we
I don't think
change
so.
course here?
Slow Horses did get a win for writing in a drama series, which was cool. But no, I'm looking forward to having a nice full year before next year's Emmys.
All in all, like you said, a strange one.
Yeah.
This was a bit bizarre.
I'm also, last thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
It'll be cool. What will be cool is to see if Shogun and House of the Dragon end up going against each other 2 years from now.
With Shogun's new season?
Yeah, if Hot D season 3 and Shogun season 2
come out
are
in
able to align
2026
a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, would
that would be fun.
Would they go up against each other? And that would kind of be cool because House of the Dragon is in a likely position to clean up again next year.
Right.
I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always fun when there's two like powerhouse epic dramas up against each other in that category.
Yeah.
And usually they're both on HBO. That will not be the case this time. FX, we should note, the big winner here in this latest iteration of the 2024 Emmys, of which there are two. All right, one of the ways I've been combating sleep deprivation due to the two small children occupying my home without having to drown myself in coffee and deal with a hardcore crash in the afternoon is Magic Mind. As someone who gets jittery when I drink coffee and energy drinks, I've been looking for something better to help me maintain my energy and focus throughout the day in a more effective way. That's where Magic Mind comes in, and today's episode is brought to you by Magic Mind. I've been pounding a Magic Mind right after my morning smoothie for 2 weeks now and have found it to be incredibly helpful at keeping my energy and focus up throughout the day without the devastating crash that other substances usually bring. Comes in these little bottles, a little shot you just toss back. Keep them in my fridge right next to my smoothie stuff, so I remember to grab one every morning. Magic Mind is a mental performance shot, an addition to your daily routine that gets you focused, mentally clear, motivated, and productive while reducing stress with mushroom nootropics and adaptogens, plus over 100% of your daily vitamin C and D per bottle. Magic Mind contains matcha, which extends the benefits of caffeine if you're a coffee drinker by slowing your body's ability to absorb caffeine, as well as a compound called L-theanine that reduces stress. These compounds work together to prevent the strike in cortisol levels and the inevitable crash that comes from ingesting too much caffeine. Matcha is basically nature's extended release version of caffeine. Magic Mind also donates 5 cents for each bottle sold to mental health charities that help U.S. homeless communities. They're 100% carbon neutral. They're so confident in what they've built that they refund 100%, no questions asked, for 100 days after buying. Shipped internationally to over 65 countries, now in Sprouts, Central Market, and Erewhon?
Erewhon.
Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah.
The old famous California grocery.
That's right. Yeah, it's big for them.
I have found I am more productive, more creative, and more calm while staying energized when I take Magic Mind, all without the crash that too much coffee brings. They have a limited offer you can use now that gets you up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with the code RBP at checkout. You can claim it at magicmind.com/RBP. Support the show and your mind at the same damn time with Magic Mind. All right, let's talk about this documentary. Wise Guy, David Chase, and The Sopranos.
What do you hear? What do you say?
Alex Gibney is the name of the documentarian, the gentleman that is interviewing David Chase in the recreation of Dr. Melfi's office, which is a cool setting. Did you notice when David Chase was like, wow, he's like, you really built this thing, huh? I see. And then he even points out the one difference. He's like, Melfi's office was a circle. And they couldn't quite get it to be totally circular, so it has angles.
Right.
It has like hard angles in the walls instead of the circle.
They tried to curve it a little bit, but yeah.
But this thing is really interesting. If you're a big fan of The Sopranos, I could not more highly recommend it, as it is like this, just like, it almost feels like you're seeing something you like secret that you're not supposed to be seeing, that you're not supposed to know about, like all this behind the scenes footage that we get is so much fun if you've seen the series over and over like I have through the years. And it starts out with just David Chase sitting there with this guy, Alex Gibney, in this recreation of Melfi's office. And from the get-go, David Chase is like super uncomfortable with what's happening. After they get a few questions in, he pretty much says like, look, man, I don't know about this. I agreed to do a documentary on The Sopranos, but this seems like it's about me. And he's like, he says straight up, I would leave, but I see all the hard work you've done here. and like, I don't want to be a dickhead. But you could tell he's like, what the fuck is it? Because they're talking about like his childhood, growing up in New Jersey, like his whole background.
Yeah. And he's kind of he's a salty type of guy.
He's a crotchety
he's
old
a crotchety
bastard.
old bastard, and kind of seems like he always has been.
Yeah, even when he wasn't old.
Correct, or even when he was just like middle aged or whatever it might be. He's always just been kind of a spiky dude.
Not a lot of smiling.
No.
And by not a lot, I mean never.
Yeah.
He does not smile. He does not really laugh.
And they get into this in the second episode, but one of the things that I picked up on within the first 15, 20 minutes is because one of the first topics that they go right into is his mom.
Right.
And about how his mom is like, he was casting Livia to basically be his mom.
Right.
And that kind of gives you a clue right there. But like like a lot of auteurs, just like Larry David with George and Seinfeld, take your pick of other examples. But like, there's a lot of David Chase in Tony Soprano. Quite a bit.
It's a fantasized version of him.
Yeah.
Like it's basically Tony Soprano is what would have happened if David Chase was a mob boss.
Yeah. And Robin Green, one of his early collaborators, who's one of the first kind of like additional talking heads, talks about how the first time she sat down with him at a lunch, the pitch was, or what she told him was like, you should write a TV show about a writer trying to get like something on the air who has this crazy mom. Like that should be the story. And so you can see also right there that like that's the seed of the idea is the mom, and he writes the feature, which is basically season 1 of The Sopranos. And it kind of shifts into like, well, nobody wants to watch that, but what if it's a mobster?
Right.
And then there's a feature script, and then there's like a network script, and then finally he's like, oh, people also want to see dudes get shot in the head.
Right. So that was another really fascinating element
there's
of
these steps of how The Sopranos kind of came to be, which is really cool and interesting.
Yeah, and like Barry just said, initially he set out to write a feature film.
Yeah.
That was going to be The Sopranos. And then there was an iteration of it where it was going to be for network TV. So nobody was going to get shot.
Right. Nobody
was going to die.
Yeah.
And then finally it turns into a television show for HBO. And they got into like the pitching of The Sopranos to different networks. Yeah. And really it becomes almost, for a short time there in the first part of this documentary, it's like HBO's history. Because like Michael Imperioli says point blank, like there was no prestige on HBO. There was nothing really positive that came with your show being on HBO. HBO was movies and boxing and like some stand-up comedy.
And some softcore porn.
And softcore porn. And that was it. Which ironically, David Chase's background also...
a little softcore porn.
He did quite a bit of some softcore snuff stuff there at the beginning of his career. You could just tell he's like a really horny guy, which that was the most fun thing about it as a huge fan of The Sopranos, seeing all the elements that went into what became this, all-time great TV show through David Chase and these little interactions that he had and these little bits and pieces of his life. He also said, much like Steve Jobs, he attributes much of his success to doing acid at one point in his teenage years, right? He goes and does acid and then like watches some film.
Oh, right. And that's when yes,
he's like, fuck, I want to make movies.
That's when he's like, yeah, that's when I knew. That's when I said it out loud. I want to make movies.
Yeah. And ironically, never had success in movies.
Not really.
And you can tell it still chaps his ass. That he never became the theatrical director that he wanted to be, even though he has arguably the most successful television show in the history of the medium and changed the genre forever and really changed HBO forever and turned it into this powerhouse of storytelling. It doesn't make him happy. Like I don't know that anything does, frankly. Mm-hmm. He's like an old codger. Is that the word?
Yeah, codger. Yeah.
He's just like you know how he has a cameo when they go across to Italy and Paulie's sitting at the coffee place outside and he turns to that old man and he says, "Buongiorno," and the dude just looks at him deadpan, and that's David Chase doing the cameo. That's actually his whole personality.
Yeah.
In that one scene, that's his whole fucking personality. But yeah, he's super uncomfortable with doing the documentary at first, which it just, the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but the first 10 to 15 minutes of this thing are edited like frenetically.
Yes.
Like it's like,
they're basically just taking like a bunch of answers to questions that they asked him and just like
splicing them together.
Yes. Yeah.
And it kind of like, it was making me anxious. I was like, is the whole thing going to be like this, man? Like what the fuck? It does slow down and turn into a normally paced interview situation eventually, but yeah, the way they edited it at the beginning, I don't know if it was just to draw you in and get your attention.
And I think it was so much of what he's saying. They're like they're showing you, like it's like everything that's just spilling out about him and about his life is like all tied to The Sopranos, basically.
Right.
Like this, like everything about him, his entire being, this is the output is The Sopranos. His life is The Sopranos, right? Like it all tied in. That's what he took. What he knew, he put it into a TV show.
And it's also almost edited like a therapy session where he's just kind of like rambling about his life, and then he even stops and says, "I guess they took a break," and he came back into the room and he's like, "I'm really not happy with the amount of verbiage from this morning," and that's when he says, "Like, I don't really want to be doing this," which is, I think, part of the irony of that's kind of what happens with Tony. Tony doesn't want to be going to therapy, but he keeps going, and then he quits at different points, and he still goes back. And then he does talk about his life and these personal things, even though it's begrudgingly done. Like, it's the same way that ironically unfolds this whole fucking documentary with David Chase. They also do the intro sequence to The Sopranos, except it's with David Chase in the passenger seat, which I thought was a very cool visualization for kind of how, like, Tony Soprano basically took over this guy's life.
Yeah.
And David was in the passenger seat being driven around by this character that he created, right? And it consumed him for many, 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 many years writing the show. And it was almost like all the stereotypes you hear about artists and writers like come to fruition on the screen when you're watching this documentary. Like Barrett said, Livia Soprano, based on David Chase's mother, like a driving force behind the way this thing came to be. And as you watch the first few seasons of Sopranos, obviously she's sort of the backbone for all the conflict in Tony's life, which then tragically has to change when Nancy Marchand got sick and passed away, and then you have that strange CGI scene where what's the cookies fucking line that you keep bringing
I
up?
don't know. There's an episode where she just have some cookies.
So yeah, David Chase goes to Wake Forest where he gets exposed to like a film class that kind of draws him in. Then he goes to NYU, and that's when it really picks up speed. And then his early film career is him making like softcore weird snuff films or some shit. He hated TV writing. He did like multiple TV shows prior to The Sopranos, which is one of the reasons The Sopranos was originally going to be a feature film, but then it just shaped into what it was. And they've got if I'm not mistaken, two different HBO executives on this thing, or maybe former HBO executives.
Yes.
I don't know if they're still there.
I think that Chris Albrecht is the former like head of HBO.
Right.
That was the head during the run of The Sopranos, basically.
Yeah,
and put it on the air as well.
It was incredible hearing from him and his perspective on how this all came to be. And in particular, they get into college, one of the most notorious episodes of The Sopranos, considered to be one of the best episodes of The Sopranos, where when he read the script that David Chase provided, he was like, no, you can't have your protagonist main character murder a man in cold blood 4 episodes into the series or 6 episodes into the series. No one is going to want to watch this anymore. Nobody's going to root for him anymore. And David Chase had to explain to him, here's why this has to happen. And that was amazing because you're seeing behind the scenes so often the executives kill an idea that ends up being the beautiful art, like driving force behind a TV show. And this man, David, whatever his name was,
for some reason I want to say Chris Albrecht.
Maybe that's right. Yeah. The HBO exec agreeing to let David Chase do his thing is why this show became so great. Letting creatives and letting writers and showrunners do their thing is how you get the best of the best. It's also the same goes for movies as well. And then there's all these fucking dickhead suits who screw everything up.
Well, and they don't really talk about this in much depth, but you can see the beginning of what HBO became known for, which is essentially like giving the license to their creators, being a place where these creatives can come and do exactly what it is that they want to do.
Get licensed to do whatever they want.
With way fewer notes and changes. And, the network, this one, we want this, and the network needs this, and yada, yada, yada.
Which, as I'm watching the former head of HBO and then one of the other executives, they had a woman they were interviewing, it made me really sad. I was like, why aren't they just still in charge? You know what I mean? It's like, at what point did they get fired? They never should have been fired. They should have been permanently installed as the heads of the network because clearly they had the formula. They understood what needed to happen, and they ushered in the golden age of television, really. Not even just for HBO. It changed the face of TV.
Right.
The decisions that they made there, and especially prior to season 1 and during the season 1 creation of The Sopranos. So that was all very, very fascinating and very, very cool, especially the part I loved when they got into college and talking about the decision-making around that.
That was cool.
Yeah. Today's episode is also brought to you by Shopify. Batman and Robin, Tony and Christopher, Ross and Barrett. So what about the perfect duo when it comes to growing your business? That's you and Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet and the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through. Selling oysters, clams, and cockles merchandise allows us to provide for our fans and listeners with shirts and hats and coffee mugs that they can wear and use in real life to show their support for us and our show. Shopify can be the platform that enables you to connect with your supporters in the same way. I've used Shopify extensively. It's amazing. It's very straightforward and easy to learn. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business, from the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify is there to help you grow. Whether you're selling merchandise for your podcast or homemade Halloween costumes, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person so you can focus on successfully growing your business. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. That's what Shopify does. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout used by Allbirds, Rothy's, Brooklyn, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/oysters, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/oysters to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/oysters, all lowercase, for that $1 per month trial period. We also get to see in this documentary the behind-the-scenes casting for several characters, like Big Pussy, Bombacero, like Tony Soprano with James Gandolfini. Obviously, one of the fascinating things about the table reads, or not table reads, the auditions for Tony Soprano, that most of the characters who auditioned for Tony, most of the actors, end up being other characters in the show.
Yep.
Which was pretty cool. We see reads for Christopher Moltisanti, which obviously went to Michael Imperioli, where they have to do the
mime
finger pistols.
Yes.
Bang, bang.
I found that quite funny.
Adriana Lacerva, which went to Drea De Matteo.
A couple of the guys are like, they don't want to do that. They're like, this is stupid. So they just kind of like lift up their hand. They're like,
is that enough?
Bang, bang.
Is that good?
And then another guy like gets out of the chair and like does like the full on, sideways. So he's like, burn. He's like super into it.
Yeah, they all look stupid in one way or another, though.
Yeah.
They have Olivia Soprano readings, which was obviously an incredibly important casting job to nail someone. That for David Chase, he had to have somebody that really represented his mother, which Nancy Marchand was able to do eventually. But those were super fun. Seeing everybody really young, too.
Yeah.
And before they gain a ton of weight in the case of James Gandolfini. But, I really enjoyed those.
The back half of the first episode is mostly casting from what I remember. Like I remember it's like David Chase's mother, HBO and how The Sopranos went from feature to network to HBO, and then it's like all about casting pretty much for the rest of that first episode.
Right.
Right down to I want to say the last one that they do is maybe it's Carm, right? Or is it?
I think it's Tony, the final one.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay. But yeah, it's there, which is, it's always fun to see that type of stuff. And like with a show like The Sopranos, I was trying to be kind of like, unbiased about it, but it's too hard. Like with the perspective, with the hindsight, with all of that, you just you see the auditions with the people that got cast, and you're like, oh well, yeah, easy choice.
That's Big Pussy. Yeah, of course that's Christopher.
Of course that's Christopher. Yeah,
everybody else kind of looks like a schmuck by comparison,
right.
by default.
But it also kind of just makes you. It's interesting. I mean, I know not everything is like this. Sometimes they need a face, or they need somebody that looks a certain way, or if you're built and look like Chris Hemsworth, you're going to get some roles, right? But then in stuff like this, I don't know. It's kind of like reassuring to know that it's not that you did bad in audition. It's just that somebody is waiting for the exact right thing, and there's no way to know what that is.
Right.
Right.
It's in their mind.
It's in
Clicks
their
for them.
mind, and so they're just waiting for one of these performances to hit it.
Right.
So it's just
Livia Soprano being the perfect example.
Is a perfect example. Yes.
Anybody could have come in and done a fantastic job with the script and their performance during the audition.
Yeah.
But until he saw Nancy Marchand do it, it didn't matter what anybody else did because she was it.
Yes.
Something about her and the way she did it represented his mother to him.
Mm-hmm.
So for all the struggling actors out there, that is a nice kind of caveat for this. It's not up to you.
Yeah.
It's not. There's not much you can do in some of these instances.
Well, yeah, and there's still like on the flip side, there's some other stuff you can glean. Studying your character, knowing about dialects, all that type of thing, because like Drea De Matteo, like they kind of pinpoint that the script says ow, but she says owa,
Owa.
you know, and that
was it.
That's it.
That was literally what got her the part.
Right. And you know, some of that I guess you could maybe study and kind of figure out how to do certain things. But by the way, I'm pretty sure the show that she left for was Joey.
No, 100% was Joey. Yeah. Now that was fucking crazy. So they basically got to a point after season 1, really, where season 1 comes out, the reviews are stellar. Everyone is raving about the show, and suddenly they find themselves in a position where like they're doing open casting for season 2, and there are like thousands of people showing up and attending.
14,000 people showed up to an open casting call in New Jersey, in like, you know, little town in New Jersey.
Wrapped around the block, like it's total chaos. So David Chase has to go into like supreme secrecy mode where all of the actors that have been cast are all concerned when they go to table reads. Is this the one where my character is going to get killed off? No, I survive. Okay, good. Point being, when they get to the point where Drea De Matteo is going to be basically written out of the show because Adriana Lacerva is going to be killed, David Chase does not tell her.
Right.
He tells her, I'm going to shoot this 2 ways. I'm going to shoot it in one way where you get away, and I'm going to shoot it in another way where they kill you, where Silvio Dante kills you.
Yeah.
And she doesn't get to know which one it's going to be. So she's in her head like, well, I've got to make a decision here.
Yeah.
I've got all this momentum in my career from The Sopranos, and when this show ends, inevitably, I will be typecast as this character, Aide, for the rest of my career. So I've got this offer on the table for this other show, Joey. So she takes it.
Yeah.
And apparently, David Chase was furious, which makes me wonder, was he going to have her get away?
No.
Or was he just pissed that she took it without really consulting with him first?
Yes, and they were shooting it 2 ways because I vaguely remember some of this, but it'll, you know, we're no stranger to this type of thing happening now for sure with shows like Hot D and Game of Thrones or whatever else. But like there had started being leaks. People were desperate to know what was going to happen this season or next season or in this episode, who's dying, like yada yada. And so there were all sorts of leaks, and so he was trying to keep that under wraps about what was going to happen, and so he did not want it to get out that
Adriana was going to get whacked.
Going to get whacked in this season. But her taking that role, and then a variety of
that's right,
like literally Variety and Hollywood Reporter and whoever else being like, you know, with their little, you know, the headshots, and it's like Drea De Matteo cast a new NBC Friends spinoff. Well, then it's like, that's kind of a
clearly
giveaway.
She's going to be off The Sopranos. Yeah, so he saw that as almost a leak in and of itself.
Yes.
And that rubbed him the wrong way, which you can kind of understand. But also it's like, you know, she's got to go get hers.
Got to do what you got to do. Yeah.
That was a wild story.
And as they talk about, writing's kind of on the wall here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like as soon as she starts talking to the feds. Like,
right. Inevitably, eventually, something was going to happen.
Yeah.
She was going to go one way or the other, right? So another really fun kind of behind-the-scenes story. So Tony Sirico, who is obviously no longer with us, passed away, not part of the documentary, plays Paulie Walnuts. He did his own hair and makeup, and he refused to allow anyone else to do it. And so his wings, his patented hairstyle, all that shit. So when they're doing Pine Barrens, and the director of that episode, and I can't remember his name, but they're trying to get him to like
mess his hair up.
Fuck his hair up so that he looks even more disheveled as the episode goes on. And he didn't want to do it. He was like, no. And the guy had to talk him into it. And inevitably he was like, fine, you son of a bitch. And like did it right in front of the guy, which is just the funniest visual ever. Mm-hmm. And everybody speaks so highly of Tony Sirico, by the way. It's like, it's really interesting to see the opinions that different people who were on the show for several years had about other people who were on the show for several years, and sort of the family that they became offset. One of the darker parts of this documentary is they really get into James Gandolfini and his demons.
Yeah, and I don't remember. Did we talk about this much when we were covering the show?
Not so much, because we were really focused on what was happening on screen.
That's what I thought too. And some of this like sort of rang a bell. It was like as it was happening, I was like, oh, maybe I have heard that before.
It was a pretty big deal with like the paparazzi and the Hollywood press type stuff.
Well, and I did not. I don't think I definitely did not have a full understanding. I didn't have it as part of the lore that this guy would just not show up to set some days, sometimes multiple days in a row.
So starting a few seasons in, he was. It's almost like, dude, it kind of reminds me of like the Heath Ledger Joker situation.
That's exactly what came to mind for me.
Like where somebody gets so into a character that it starts to really affect their personal life, and you sort of become like melded together with this character, which is a dark and fucked up character, and suddenly you have all these personal issues.
Yeah, and likely for Heath Ledger as well, but Gandolfini has talked in interviews before about like how his addiction issues and his abuse of drugs and alcohol started when he was 18 or 20. So it's not like this role
put all of the problems in his life
killed him. And he also a little unlike Heath Ledger, he lived many years after The Sopranos was over. So he made it through the show.
Right.
It's just that it certainly seems like it took a massive toll on him and maybe didn't give him the opportunity to get the help that he needed, get the rehab that he needed.
Yeah, and you get the impression as you watch a lot of the behind-the-scenes footage that they give you of James Gandolfini being Tony Soprano, that it was an incredibly heavy burden to bear.
Yes.
That it was really, really emotionally taxing for him to switch into character. And he was doing like everything he could to provide levity on the set. Like there's a very serious scene with him and Dr. Melfi being shot, and he's like doing goofy shit and like looking over at the camera and doing like you know what I mean? Like pussy eating tongue or whatever you want to call it. Like that was all really interesting to see.
He's goofing around.
But you could tell it was a big challenge for him. It's not like they got a couple seasons in and he was like, well, this is really easy. Now I just flip the switch and I'm Tony Soprano. Like, no, it was a beating.
He went deep. Some really interesting stuff. He talks about how like when he needed to be angry, he would have to go to certain places to achieve the level of anger that he felt was warranted. And so he was like, you want to be angry? Try sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night for a few nights in a row.
He would deprive himself of sleep.
Yeah. Drink 6 cups of coffee so that you're just like
agitated,
on edge and agitated.
Yeah.
Some pretty deep and dark stuff, and
because they're cutting in those pieces of information came from the Inside the Actor, whatever the name of that interview show was.
Yes, there's a few different interviews that they have
Actor
with him,
Studio,
but a
what's
lot
it called?
of them come from Inside the Actor Studio. Yeah,
with that really famous dude. What the fuck is his name, man?
It's slipping my mind.
James Lipton.
Yeah.
So that's when he was describing how he would prepare himself to show this like extreme rage, but also you kind of have to have that shit in you somewhere.
You do, and just like there's a lot of David Chase in Tony Soprano, they that's something that I think becomes very clear and obvious is that there's a lot of similarities between Jim Gandolfini, Jim, not James.
All call him Jim.
They all call him Jim. Jim Gandolfini and Tony Soprano as well. Like there's
it was a triumphant because you could tell David Chase and James Gandolfini, Jim, really identified with each other.
Yeah.
And they all kind of merged and became this one fucked up, angry, miserable thing.
Early on, David Chase even kind of looks like Jim Gandolfini a little bit.
Before he puts on a ton of weight.
Yeah. There's some similarities between their overall kind of look.
Right.
As well.
And surely, I mean, part of what, led to Mr. Gandolfini's demise was like the overeating and overdrinking. I mean, the story you always see is like his last meal.
Yeah, I read
3
about it last
entrees
night.
and crushed like 16 drinks or whatever at this one meal. I mean, that's what Tony was doing on the show, man.
Right,
like they're eating and drinking a lot, you know? So if you have those vices already that you're battling with, and then you're giving yourself to this character who is like a personification of all the worst parts of you, that's dangerous to play with.
And it seems like on set was, kind of a recipe for disaster. Drea De Matteo seems like she was getting after it with the whole cast. Michael Imperioli, I think has also had, like, we always talk about how nobody can write a cokehead like that unless you have experience.
No, dude, that guy did drugs. Yeah, he was a fantastic drug addict.
And so there's stories about Gandolfini, like, and they're like, he's going down to Atlantic City like the night before they're taping nearby, and he brings everybody down there, and like they're all just like doing God knows what till all hours of the morning.
And then he's like not showing back up.
He's not showing up.
They had to put in his contract renewal that every day he didn't show up was $100,000 fine.
Yeah, once they give him the million an episode, it also came with the stipulation that days missed cost him $100,000.
And you could tell they got to that point where he was up for a contract renewal, and like I almost got the impression he did not want to continue down this road.
Right.
Like it was eating him alive, but then the amount of money that they were able to get and the success of the show made him, and he felt he had an obligation to everyone else on the show.
Yeah.
And it kind of brought him back. And then he felt so bad about the lengthy contract negotiations that he gave a bunch of the cast members $30,000 checks as like a sorry for being a dickhead prick and this all being kind of revolving around me, except
Edie Falco.
He didn't give Edie Falco one. And she never even knew. When the dude, what's the name of the documentarian?
Alex Gibney?
Alex Gibney, you had it. When Alex Gibney tells her about that part, she's like, "What?"
Yeah,
and it seemed like genuinely the first time she'd ever hear that. And she was like, "I didn't get a fucking $30,000 check," and you have to assume that's because she was also probably pretty highly paid.
Probably. Look, there's okay. So this documentary is really interesting. I've got questions though. One is that I wonder why this was only 2 parts. Because it seems like you could have made this 4 easy.
Seems like you could have done like a 10-episode season, honestly.
Yes.
There's a lot to pull at here.
And you've got everybody sitting down. You've got Edie Falco and Dre DeMatteo and Michael Imperioli, and like all of these people sat down and gave these lengthy interviews, right?
That we get little pieces of.
That we really get very, very little of.
Lorraine Bracco is another huge part of it.
Yes, and I don't know. There's something. I found Edie Falco's interviews really interesting because there's something underneath everything that she's saying.
Right.
And I feel like there was potentially tension between her and Jim Gandolfini as well.
Which you could see. I mean, there's always tension between their characters.
Right. Yes.
And you kind of have to make that translate. If they were too buddy-buddy off screen, maybe he wouldn't have been able to be such a prick to her on screen.
One of the things that I read last night when I was just like going and doing a little bit of my own research is that like he always kind of that and it doesn't elaborate, so I don't think like he hated her or anything, but it talks about how he kind of resented how easy it was for her to get in and out of character.
Oh, right.
And to deliver emotion and to deliver that type of scene work that they would do together, and then basically be able to let it go.
And he couldn't do it.
And get back into it and let it go.
And he couldn't do it.
She was super professional. Obviously, I don't think was dealing with some of the same demons that Jim was. And so I think there was friction there because he was killing himself to get these performances, and she was making it look easy. So I wonder if there's maybe a little bit more to that, if they didn't have the greatest relationship, or look, people go to work and sometimes don't like other people that they work with, right? That's very normal. Everybody listening to the show probably has an experience like that. It's like it's normal for a job,
and so you have to kind of just make it work anyway.
Make it work, but and she obviously has not. Edie in this show has nice things to say about him. She talks about what a great human he was and all that type of stuff. But there is so much to unpack there. There's so much that people clearly like won't even say or talk about it. And because he passed.
It's an even weirder situation.
There's a layer of I mean, let's be real. There's a layer of sugar on it. He's
100%.
He's a late great actor that delivered one of the, if not the most iconic television performance of all time. It's like we're going to talk about him as a legend, glowingly. Yes. And so there's so much there that it's like at various points in this documentary, I'm like, man, I want more. I want to go deeper. Like let's let these interviews go. Like,
made me wonder how much this guy has that didn't make it into the doc. That's like, oh my God. Because to your point, I couldn't believe it was only 2 parts. When I finished it, I was like, wow, there was so much more to chew on here.
Totally, yeah.
That we just got these little morsels of. And there's that, one of the realest moments is when he brings up the $30,000 check thing, and you can see almost the hurt in Edie Falco's face. Like, she's like, damn, what?
Yeah.
Like, why? But why not? You know what I mean? Like,
and then she just kind of deads it. She's like, yeah, I didn't know about that. I never heard about that.
And then they move
I don't
on.
know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And that's it. And you're just left to think about it yourself. Like, whoa, why? Like, she's like his number 2 character, basically. And he went around handing out checks and just didn't give her one. That's fucking bizarre. Want to learn a new language? Well, the best way to do that is to uproot your entire life, drop yourself in the middle of a new country and figure it out from there. But if you're not ready for that, you can still learn a new language the next best way. That's with Babel. Today's episode is also brought to you by Babel. Speak like a whole new you with Babel, the science-backed language learning app that gets you talking. Wasting hundreds of dollars on private tutors is the old school way of learning a new language. Babel's 10-minute lessons are quick and handcrafted by over 200 language experts, ready to get you talking your new language in 3 weeks, because talking is the key to really knowing any language. Babel's tips and tools are grounded in the real-life stuff you'll actually need. Everything is focused on conversations, so you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. Babel's courses are incredibly convenient. I've used them to try and regain my grasp on Espanol, and they make it super easy to learn how to order food, ask for directions, or speak to merchants without having to consult language apps while out and about or on vacation in a foreign land. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babel is better. One study found that using Babel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester of college, which Tony Soprano had 1.5 of.
He did.
Plus, all of Babel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. They have over 16 million subscriptions sold. Get Babel. Travel. Here's a special limited-time deal for the Clam Fam. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/OCC. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/OCC. That's BABBEL.com/OCC. Rules and restrictions apply. A couple of other interesting points about the documentary on our way out here. One, they chose to show some of the most brutal scenes in the show.
They did, yes.
In full.
Yes.
Notably, college, the strangulation scene.
Yeah.
But then really the worst one in the history of The Sopranos, one of the hardest scenes to watch in the history of TV, Dr. Melfi's rape scene.
Yes.
And when they cut to it, I was like, yeah, okay, I could see giving us 5 seconds of the beginning of this so that we get the context. But then it just keeps rolling, and I was like, oh, please don't. And you watch the whole thing unfold.
I forgot how rough
From
that
the
was.
beginning of the assault to the assailant getting up and leaving. And you're just like, wow, why? And I really didn't quite understand the choice there from the documentarian to just be like, no, let's put the whole thing in. I guess to remind you how far that show was willing to go at different points. They also talked to Lorraine Bracco about like her experience having to live that.
Yep.
Which I guess was important for context too. But yeah, that was wild.
I mean, throughout, just to, I'm glad you mentioned this because it's something that I wanted to bring up as well. Like the documentary definitely serves to remind you, of course, how amazing and good this show was, but also how dark and violent it
got
be.
at different points.
Yes, and Tony kills a lot of people. He beats up on a lot of women. Like he is a true, he is a socio-psycho maybe, but at best, he is an extremely violent person.
An abuser.
Yes. And there's, I thought it was really interesting that David Chase calls out what we like about him is that we can see the kind of like the hurt little boy.
Yeah.
That lives inside of him.
Right.
And I think that's a great call. It's not something that we ever touched on when we were covering the show. But obviously good insight from the creator and writer of the show.
Well, and one of the ways they tip us off to that in the show frequently is with Uncle Junior's You Never Had the Makings of a Varsity Athlete.
Yeah.
It's like this childhood, teenage pain and angst that he never escaped.
Yeah.
That really gets under his skin, where anybody who had healed from their childhood would be able to just be like, why are you even bringing that up? And move on. Tony can't do it.
And then there are obviously like other things that they talk about where he, at various points he does seem to have a conscience about stuff. He seeks out certain things about himself, you know what I mean? Like he either is forced or seems to want to learn more. Like we go through the peyote episode and the Kevin Finnerty episodes and all that type of stuff. And so they do obviously give you some things that let you continue to watch him, really.
Right.
So to be like, I still want to see what happens to this guy.
Yeah, that put you on the side of almost rooting for him.
Yes.
Right?
But yeah, man, it's the places he goes and the things that he does are really dark and really violent, and they definitely remind you of all of that, about how all these guys are really
terrible pieces of shit
humans,
right?
Some even more so than Tony. Even though they do kind of call him like the devil, right? Like he is the main devil.
Yeah, the main darkness. And I mean, they get into, it's like, again, this serves as almost a time capsule for TV, because prior to The Sopranos, that did not exist in this medium. It existed in movies somewhat, but there were no anti-heroes.
Correct. Yeah.
Like Tony Soprano, and really all of the character. Even Carm is like, she's not a hero. Right. She's not a good person.
No.
Her moral journey throughout the course of the show is her attempting to find a good person within herself and failing.
Yeah.
So these are all bad people by our, basic definitions. And it changed the course of television forever in that way too, where it was like, you can have somebody kill someone 6 episodes into the TV show and still be the main character that you're for some reason rooting for.
But I do think that they, specifically with the Melfi scene, I do feel like they showed that because they were trying to re-illuminate that this show didn't have anything that was off limits for it when it came to like pushing the envelope and kind of showing you how craven like this, certain aspects of life get.
Of humanity, yeah. They also talked about how they used the scenes like Melfi's rape scene and like the murders sparingly. Like they didn't do them just because. They were always earned. And that is an important aspect of the show. While as brutal and violent and disturbing as it could be, you would also go stretches of episodes without a single body dropping or any real violent acts taking place. And then you'd have these moments that sort of remind you, like, you're rooting for terrible criminals here. They get into the dream sequence stuff.
Yep.
And which was another major sort of like stylistic element of The Sopranos that made it stand out so much from everything else I'd ever watched, and why David Chase did the dream sequence stuff the way he did. And they point to it, and Michael Imperioli points to it as one of the things that made David Chase so special as a creator and as the showrunner, is that they would get a few seasons in, and he was like, well, we can't just do the same things over and over. We're going to have to do some weird shit.
Right.
To continue to try to push the envelope. And Michael Imperioli touches on how much pressure was on David Chase to not just deliver a product that was on the same level as the prior season, but to elevate above it.
Yep.
And when you do that 7 times or 6 times with an A and a B, that's really, really hard to do. David Chase also said that the only reason 6B is 6B is because HBO didn't want to give the actors another raise.
Yeah.
So they found a loophole.
Yep.
I found it very interesting that HBO was willing to air a documentary about how HBO tries to screw actors, right? That was really, really something to see. Almost like they're saying, like, hey, we've turned a new leaf since then, but I would argue that they've gotten worse in terms of their overall production company.
This is something that seems to have come up more and more over the last 5 years with all the streamers as well.
Right.
Because it's part of the unions, part of the deals that, like, when a show goes after 3, everybody gets raises. So Netflix kind of historically loves to cancel a show after 3 seasons.
So that they don't
have to pay everybody the
even more
raise.
money. Right.
So I think that happens every 3 seasons. Part of that is that I feel like even HBO now knows that they are essentially not in the business of making shows that go more than 6 seasons now.
Right. So there's only a couple of negotiation periods.
Yeah. I mean, nobody is. When was the last time a show hit season 7, right?
That's a great point. It doesn't really happen anymore.
Yeah. I mean, beyond, Law and Order.
Those don't count.
Yeah.
Prestige TV going
Lone
more than
Star
a few episodes is very, very rare at this point. Yeah. Okay. People that were involved. They got Steven Van Zandt as a main piece here, also known as Silvio Dante, also known as the guitarist for Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen makes an appearance when David Chase gets inducted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame.
New Jersey Hall of Fame, yeah.
Michael Imperioli, a.k.a. Christopher Moltisanti, serves as a really great interview throughout the course of the documentary. Edie Falco, as we mentioned, Carmela Soprano. Lorraine Bracco, probably my favorite because she clearly had such a personal relationship with Jim. Old Jim Gandolfini.
Yep.
And she talked about watching the finale with him, and that when the screen cut to black, he was like, that was it? Like, he was shocked. None of them knew that was the way that David Chase was going to end the show. They have some of the original writers, like the one you mentioned up top,
Yeah, Robin Green.
who was eventually fired.
Yes,
And she
yeah.
even talks about that, which was fascinating. Like, there was definitely conflict, not only on the writer's room, also on the set, and also with Gandolfini not showing up. There was a lot of turmoil in this show and around it. People I was surprised were not involved. Steve Sharippa, a.k.a. Bobby Bacala, because he is still a working actor, kind of surprised me he wasn't there. In the same vein, Jamie Lynn Siegler, a.k.a. Meadow Soprano, and Robert Eiler, a.k.a. AJ Soprano. They're both still around. They both live in Austin with Barrett and I, in fact. They do a podcast together.
Oh, they both live in Austin?
Yeah.
Oh.
The Sopranos comes up a lot. I was just kind of surprised that they weren't involved in some way, shape, or form. You brought up how this thing could have been a lot more than 2 parts of a documentary series. Well, this is one of the reasons I think, like, it shocks me. Like, they had all these other people they could have brought in. Maybe the most shocking, Steve Buscemi.
Okay.
No Steve Buscemi, a.k.a. Tony Blundetto, also one of the writers and directors on The Sopranos. I think for some of these people, it was probably too painful or something they were not willing to go back and relive. I think for some of them, there were probably scheduling conflicts, right? But you would think, if you're going to do this documentary, which serves as the definitive Sopranos documentary, that you would go all out and get as many people as possible and maybe make it more than 2 parts. And it's just kind of strange that some of these key players in the series, especially Buscemi, who was a writer and director, weren't in it.
Yeah. That's. I mean, this is kind of, piggybacking on what I was saying about, like, there were parts of this that I found interesting. I don't, like, what was the impetus for this, for one? Why did old Mr. Gibney,
Alex,
why did he make this? Why now? How long has this been going on? What was was this more of a, I think it was more of a David Chase documentary almost, even though and by that nature, it kind of has to touch on Jim Gandolfini and all of that. But yeah, I don't know. These are good questions, but it wasn't supposed to be, clearly, it's only 2 episodes. It wasn't supposed to be like this full-throated, like,
Sopranos
doc. Yes. Otherwise, they would have gotten all those people.
Well, there's a reason it's named Wise Guy, David Chase, and The Sopranos.
Yeah. So it's just curious. It's kind of an interesting little, 2-parter behind the scenes kind of wrap up of the show or something.
Really strange, man.
Yeah.
Doesn't touch on the movie at all that they did, which
yeah.
David Chase directed. He finally got that director's role in a movie, and I still haven't watched it, and maybe never will. I still haven't decided. I just don't need more. I mean, I have it. I have the ending, which they also bring up, and I was really curious to see how they would handle this. And David Chase handled it the way he has handled it every single time he's been asked about the ending in the last, however many years we are removed from the Sopranos finale at this point. But the beauty of it was I fell asleep during part 2, probably 30 minutes in. My wife finished it. So the next time we went around to finish it up, which was Monday of this week, she's telling me, like, I can't wait till you see how they end this thing. So I'm already queued up to know, like, well, they're going to do something interesting, or he's going to say some crazy shit. As the last 20 minutes starts to unfold and we're going through, Adriana Lacerva's exit from the show, yada, 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 I paused it and I turned to her and I go, oh, they're going to cut to black. They're going to do he's going to be talking about the very end of the show and how Tony dies or doesn't die.
Yeah. And
they're going to cut to black. And she was like, you fucker. And that was what happened. And I loved that, though, because he says, to be honest, and then just it cuts off. And this is after everybody discussing the finale ending, right? Which was obviously this explosive thing that really, looking back with hindsight and with the context of this documentary, the way they chose to end the final episode of The Sopranos elevated it even more and made it sort of live on forever and become like this mythical fucking Hollywood, piece of art. And you have to give David Chase a ton of credit for that, because as they repeatedly addressed throughout the documentary, one of the reasons the show was so successful and was as good as it was is because he was willing to push the envelope in ways that nobody else was doing on TV. And that finale decision, I mean, their production team had to have been like, are you sure, dude? Like, the editor was like, you just want me to turn it off? And I will never forget yelling at my mom. The second the screen went to black, I was like, Mom, what the fuck did you do? I was like, are you sitting on the remote? What are you doing? And she was like, I'm not doing anything. I haven't done anything. And I was like, fuck. And then they finally had the names come up, and I was like, oh my God, that's genius. Anyway, As we mentioned a couple times today, Barrett and I did a companion podcast for every single episode of The Sopranos, which is available on patreon.com/oysters, clams, cockles. If you have not checked that out, a lot of people are being inspired by this documentary to do rewatches. The podcast that we did is friendly to both first-time watchers and rewatchers. Get on patreon.com/oysters, clams, cockles and enjoy a companion podcast for every single episode of The Sopranos as you do your rewatch. Barrett, it was his first time watching. It was my rewatch number 7-ish or something. Documentary was fantastic. I definitely watched some episodes of The Sopranos over the past couple days just because I felt obligated after seeing this thing. Like Barrett, I wish there was more. I'm kind of looking forward to going and digging through the articles around this thing on the internet to see if I can figure out, like, what the fuck was this?
Yeah.
Like, what happened here? And remember, Barrett and I will be back later this week on patreon.com/oysters, clams, cockles, talking through this a little bit more, answering some phone calls, some hotline calls from our listeners, probably getting a little more into the Emmys as well, and other things that we are watching that are not Sopranos related. Next week, we will dive into our coverage of The Penguin, which premieres tomorrow. The first episode airs on HBO, starring Colin Farrell as Oz Cobb, is what they've shortened his name to. So it's not Oswald Cobblepot. For this series, it's just Oz Cobb.
Is that one word? Is that one name?
No, it's
one
two
name?
names.
Oz Cobb?
First name Oz, last name Cobb.
Oz Cobb.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Go to patreon.com/oysters, clams, cockles now and enjoy a 7-day free trial. Check out all of our ad-free exclusive content on Patreon and stick around to support the show. Barrett and I will be back later this week on Patreon. We'll be back next week with the Penguin coverage. Follow Barrett at Barrett Dudley on Instagram and Twitter. Follow me at WRBolin. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, what do you hear? What do you say?